Oh, he's just here, my wife told her new elite male boss. I didn't say a word, just stepped outside. A minute later, her boss's phone rang. I watched through the window as he listened, went pale, and stared at me with pure terror. You know that moment when you realize you've been downgraded? Not in a dramatic, throw the ring back kind of way, but in that slow, soul-crushing realization that somewhere between I do and I don't care anymore, you became about as relevant as a decorative throw pillow? Yeah, that happened to me at exactly 8:47 p.m. on a Thursday, surrounded by people who smell like money and talk like they invented the concept of working hard. We were at Sabrina's company party. And when I say party, I mean one of those corporate circuses where everyone's wearing clothes that cost more than my first car, sipping champagne that probably has a better retirement plan than I do, and laughing at jokes that aren't actually funny but sound expensive. The venue was this ridiculous penthouse downtown with marble floors so shiny you could see your own disappointment reflected back at you. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city like we were all masters of the universe instead of people who spend 40 hours a week in meetings that could have been emails. I was standing near the hors d'oeuvres table because, let's be honest, the only reason to attend these things is the free food, trying to figure out what exactly I was eating. Was it salmon? Tuna? Some kind of fancy cat food they're trying to pass off as seared ahi with a yuzu reduction? Whatever it was, it tasted like regret and corporate synergy. A waiter in a bow tie that looked tighter than my patience kept circling with a tray of something green and leafy, and I kept declining because I didn't come here to eat my feelings in salad form. That's when I saw him. Mr. Gel Hair McConfidence himself, Sabrina's new boss. The guy who apparently walks on water and turns quarterly reports into gold. He had that look, you know the one, where his teeth are too white, his suit is too perfect, and his handshake probably comes with a credit score requirement. He was working the room like a politician at a fundraiser, all slaps on the back and great to see you, champ, energy, even though you know he doesn't remember anyone's name unless it's followed by executive vice president of. I watched him make his way over to Sabrina, who was standing in a cluster of her coworkers, all of them nodding enthusiastically like bobbleheads on a dashboard. She'd been practicing her corporate laugh for weeks, that weird, high-pitched sound that doesn't match her real laugh at all. Her real laugh is this snorty, unfiltered thing that used to make me crack up at 2 in the morning when we'd binge-watch terrible reality TV. But corporate Sabrina doesn't snort. Corporate Sabrina sounds like she's auditioning for a commercial about living your best life. Gel Hair spotted me standing there with my little plate of mystery fish and my glass of whiskey, because I'll be damned if I'm drinking champagne that tastes like fancy vinegar. And his eyebrows did that thing where they go up just a little, like he surprised someone let the hired help in. He walked over, and I could smell his cologne from 3 feet away. It was the kind that screams, I drive a luxury sedan and have opinions about golf courses. Sabrina, he said, flashing those bleached teeth. Is this your husband? Simple question, right? Yes or no? Maybe throw in a yes, this is my husband. The guy who supported me through grad school and believed in me when I was eating ramen for dinner 4 nights a week. But no. What came out of her mouth was so much worse. She looked at me, actually looked at me for the first time all evening, and said with this dismissive little wave of her hand, oh, he's just here. Just here. Like I was a potted plant she forgot to water. Like I was part of the furniture package that came with the venue. Like I was some random dude who wandered in off the street because I heard there was free shrimp and thought, why not crash this party and stand awkwardly near my wife while she pretends I don't exist? The words hung in the air for a second, and I swear even Gel Hair looked uncomfortable. One of her coworkers, this woman named Brittany who always talks about her Peloton like it's a member of her family, let out this weird, nervous laugh and quickly changed the subject to something about quarterly projections. But I wasn't listening anymore because my brain had just blue-screened like a Windows 95 computer trying to run modern software. I didn't yell, didn't cause a scene. Didn't throw my drink in anyone's face or storm out like some wrong protagonist in a Lifetime movie. Instead, I did something way more terrifying. Absolutely nothing. I set my glass down on the nearest table with the kind of calm precision you see in movies right before someone executes the perfect revenge plan. I nodded once, just once, like I was filing this moment away in a mental folder labeled evidence for future use. And then I turned and walked toward the exit. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside onto the balcony, away from the hyena laughter and the clinking glasses and the woman who'd apparently forgotten that I was the reason she could afford those designer heels she was wearing. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in a while. Rich Morrison, attorney at law, and the only lawyer I know who actually enjoys destroying people legally. He picked up on the second ring. "Please tell me someone finally did something stupid enough to make this interesting," he said, because Rich treats the legal system like it's a video game, and he's hunting for the final boss. "It's time," I said, watching the city lights blink below me like they were in on the joke. "Time for what?" he asked, and I could hear the grin in his voice. I looked back through the glass doors at the party, at Sabrina laughing with her boss, at all those people who thought success meant forgetting where you came from and who helped you get there. And I smiled. Not a happy smile, but the kind of smile that means someone's about to learn a very expensive lesson. "For him to realize his Rolex doesn't make him immortal," I said. Rich laughed, the kind of laugh that costs people their boats and second homes. "Oh, this is going to be fun." I hung up and stood there for another minute, watching my wife perform for an audience that would forget her name the second she stopped being useful. She'd called me just here, like I was nothing, like I was nobody. And you know what? She was about to find out exactly who nobody really was. Because I wasn't just here. I was everywhere she'd forgotten to look. Let me take you back 10 years, because every good revenge story needs a proper origin story. And mine starts in a crappy one-bedroom apartment in Queens that smelled like the Chinese takeout place downstairs and had a radiator that sounded like it was trying to communicate with the dead. This was back when Sabrina was in her second year of her MBA program at Columbia, back when she still looked at me like I was someone worth investing in instead of someone she needed to explain away at corporate functions. She was drowning in case studies and networking events, trying to figure out how to climb the corporate ladder without falling off and breaking her ambition in the process. Meanwhile, I was sitting at our kitchen table, which was really just a folding card table we'd bought at Target for $20, living on a diet of coffee, energy drinks, and the kind of hope that doesn't come with a paycheck. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning, kiss her goodbye while she was still asleep, and then spend the next 18 hours staring at lines of code until my eyes felt like they'd been replaced with sandpaper. I wasn't building the next Facebook or some ridiculous app that tells you which sandwich you are based on your zodiac sign. I was working on something way less sexy, but infinitely more useful. A logistics algorithm that could optimize shipping routes so efficiently it made the current industry standard look like someone was planning deliveries with a magic 8-ball. We're talking about saving trucking companies millions of dollars in fuel costs, reducing delivery times, and basically making the entire supply chain run like a Swiss watch instead of a drunk guy trying to solve a Rubik's Cube. The beauty of it was in its simplicity. No flashy AI buzzwords that nobody actually understands. No machine learning synergy or blockchain integration or whatever nonsense people were throwing around at tech conferences to sound smart. Just pure, elegant mathematics. The kind of code that works because it has to, not because it's trendy. I built it from scratch, testing and retesting every single function until it was so tight you couldn't find a bug if you had a microscope and a team of interns. My buddy Derek, who I'd met in a coding boot camp back when we both thought we'd be the next Silicon Valley success stories, would come over sometimes and watch me work. He'd bring pizza, usually from this place on the corner that gave you grease burns if you weren't careful, and sit there shaking his head. "Dude," he'd say, tomato sauce in his beard because Derek was never what you'd call refined. "You're building Fort Knox for truck routes. This is either genius or insane, and I genuinely can't tell which. Why not both?" I'd say, not looking up from my screen because I was in that zone where time stops existing and you forget you have a body that needs things like food and bathroom breaks. Sabrina would come home late from her study groups, smelling like the library and expensive coffee from the campus Starbucks, and find me still hunched over my laptop like some kind of code goblin. She'd rub my shoulders and ask how it was going, and I'd tell her about the breakthrough I'd had or the problem I was trying to solve, and she'd actually listen. She'd bring me tea, not because I asked for it, but because she knew I'd forget to make it myself, and she'd sit with me for a while, even though she had her own mountain of homework waiting. "You're going to change the world with this," she'd say, and back then, I actually believed she believed it. It took me 2 years to perfect the algorithm, and another 6 months to figure out what the hell to do with it. I wasn't some business genius with venture capital connections and a LinkedIn profile that made people swoon. I was just a guy with a really good piece of code and absolutely no idea how to turn it into something that paid the rent. That's when I met Patricia Chun at a tech meetup in Manhattan. One of those networking things where everyone's trying to casually hand out business cards while pretending they're not desperately looking for their next opportunity. Patricia was in her 50s, had worked in logistics for 30 years, and had the kind of no-nonsense energy that made you sit up straight when she talked. She looked at my demo, didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity, and then nodded once. "This is good," she said, which coming from Patricia was basically like winning an Oscar. "You could license this and make a fortune, or you could sell it outright and let someone else screw it up. What's your play?" I chose licensing because I'm not an idiot. Selling it would have meant one big payday, and then watching someone else get rich off my work for the rest of my life. Licensing meant I kept ownership, collected royalties, and maintained control over how it was used. Patricia introduced me to 3 major trucking companies, and within a year, all 3 had signed contracts. The money started rolling in, not buy a yacht money, but definitely stop eating ramen and upgrade to a 2-bedroom apartment money. That's when I did the smartest thing I've ever done. I created ArcSyn Technologies LLC. The name stands for Architectural Synchronization, which sounds like it means something important, but is actually just fancy words I threw together because they sounded professional. I specifically chose the most boring, generic, corporate-sounding name I could think of because I wanted it to blend into the background. I didn't want some flashy startup name that would make people curious. I wanted something so forgettable that when people saw it on contracts, their eyes would just glaze over and move on to the next line. Derek thought I was crazy. "Dude, you need something catchy. Something with tech, or solutions, or maybe both." ArcSyn sounds like a pharmaceutical company that makes medication for restless leg syndrome. "Perfect," I said. "That's exactly what I want." I registered everything properly, set up the LLC with Rich's help, because even back then I knew you don't mess around with legal structure, and made sure every single licensing agreement went through ArcSyn Technologies, not through me personally. On paper, I was just the founder and CEO of a small tech company nobody had ever heard of. The algorithm was the company's intellectual property, not mine, which gave me way more protection and flexibility. But here's where it gets interesting, and where my paranoia, or as I prefer to call it, prophetic correctness, really shines. When Rich was drawing up the standard licensing contracts, I asked him to add something special. "I want a clause," I told him, "that protects me if things ever get complicated." Rich looked at me over his glasses like I'd just asked him to add a clause about alien invasions. "Complicated how?" "Personal conflicts of interest," I said. "If anyone directly connected to me, spouse, family member, business partner, ever joins a company that's trying to acquire or license my technology, I want an automatic termination option." He laughed at first, thought I was joking, but when he realized I was serious, he got this look like he'd just discovered I was secretly Batman. That's either incredibly smart or incredibly paranoid. Are you expecting your wife to betray you or something? "I'm not expecting anything," I said. "But I'd rather have a parachute I don't need than need a parachute I don't have." So he added it. Clause 14b, buried in the middle of Section 14 about contractual obligations and termination conditions, written in the kind of legal language that makes your eyes cross, but is absolutely ironclad. It stated, in fancy lawyer speak, that if any person with a direct personal relationship to the beneficial owner of ArcSyn Technologies LLC became employed by a company seeking to acquire, license, or integrate the proprietary algorithm, said company would be in immediate breach of contract and all agreements would be null and void. The clause would activate like a self-destruct sequence in a spy movie, except instead of explosions, there would be lawsuits and very angry executives. I filed it away, forgot about it for years, because who actually thinks they'll need something like that? And then Sabrina got a job at Hartman Logistics Solutions, the same company that had just spent 6 months negotiating to acquire expanded licensing rights to my algorithm. The same company that was about to make the biggest supply chain integration deal in their corporate history. The same company whose new hotshot boss with the gel hair and the God complex had just asked if I was her husband, and she'd said I was just here. Guess what clause just became very, very relevant? I stayed outside on that balcony for a good 20 minutes, just watching the party through the glass like it was some kind of nature documentary about corporate predators in their natural habitat. You ever notice how much easier it is to see things clearly when there's a literal barrier between you and the chaos? It's like watching fish in an aquarium. You can observe all their little behaviors without getting wet. Inside, the party was hitting that sweet spot where everyone's had just enough champagne to think they're funnier and more important than they actually are, but not enough to start making regrettable decisions that'll end up as whispered gossip in the break room on Monday. The music was that generic jazz fusion stuff that's supposed to sound sophisticated, but really just sounds like someone's having a stroke on a saxophone. People were clustering in those weird social formations that happen at corporate events. The ambitious ones circling the executives like sharks around chum, the middle management folks trying to look busy and relevant, and the support staff congregating near the bar because they know the truth. Free alcohol is the only real perk of these things. And there was Sabrina, right in the center of it all, absolutely glowing. She'd changed since we first met. Not just physically, though the designer clothes and the professionally straightened hair and the makeup that probably cost more than our first date were definitely new additions. It was something deeper, something in the way she held herself now. She stood taller, laughed louder, commanded space like she'd been taking lessons. Corporate Sabrina was a whole different person from the woman who used to ugly cry at romantic comedies while eating ice cream straight from the container. Her boss. I'd started mentally calling him Chad, even though I knew his real name was Marcus something hyphenated, was holding court near the bar, and naturally, Sabrina had positioned herself in his orbit. He was one of those guys who gestures a lot when he talks, like he's conducting an invisible orchestra that only plays songs about quarterly earnings and market disruption. Every third word out of his mouth was probably synergy or leverage or some other business buzzword that sounds important but means absolutely nothing. I watched him hand Sabrina a glass of wine, something red that probably cost more per bottle than my first car payment, and she took it with this smile that made my stomach turn. Not because it was flirtatious, exactly, though there was definitely some of that energy there. It was worse than that. It was the smile of someone who's found their people, their tribe, their place in the hierarchy. She looked at him the way she used to look at me when I'd explained some complicated coding problem I'd solved, like I was impressive, like I mattered, like I was worth paying attention to. He said something, probably about disrupting the logistics industry or revolutionizing supply chain management or whatever corporate fairy tale they were telling themselves this week, and she laughed. God, she laughed like he'd just delivered the punchline to the funniest joke in human history. Her hand reached out and touched his arm. Just briefly, just a little brush of her fingers on his sleeve, but it was enough. Enough to make me wonder when exactly I'd become the guy she had to explain away instead of the guy she wanted to show off. But here's the thing about rage. The real, deep kind doesn't explode. It doesn't yell or break things or make scenes that people will talk about for weeks. Real rage gets quiet. It gets cold. It gets calculating. And standing there on that balcony, watching my wife audition for the role of someone who'd completely forgotten who paid for her MBA and supported her through every late-night study session and every failed exam and every moment of doubt, I felt a calm settle over me that was honestly kind of terrifying. I pulled out my phone again and called Rich. He answered immediately because Rich has this sixth sense for when something legally interesting is about to happen. Please tell me you're about to ruin someone's evening, he said by way of greeting. Better, I said, watching Chad gesture enthusiastically about something while Sabrina nodded like he was revealing the secrets of the universe. I'm about to ruin someone's entire fiscal quarter. Oh, I like where this is going. What do you need? Remember Clause 14b? There was a pause, and then I heard papers rustling on his end. Rich keeps physical copies of important contracts because he's old school like that, doesn't trust cloud storage, thinks the internet is one solar flare away from disappearing and taking everyone's files with it. The spousal conflict of interest clause? The one I said you'd never actually use. Yeah, that one. Turns out I'm using it tonight. Wait. More rustling. Hartman Logistics Solutions. They're in the middle of that acquisition negotiation with ArcSyn. Please don't tell me. My wife just started working there 3 months ago. Rich let out a whistle that probably scared his cat. And she didn't disclose that her husband owns the company they're trying to do business with? Oh, it gets better. She doesn't even know it's my company. Apparently, I'm so forgettable that she didn't recognize my own algorithm when they showed it to her. That's... Rich paused, and I could practically hear him grinning through the phone. That's the most beautiful thing I've heard all week, and I just won a case against a guy who tried to sue his neighbor for having an ugly garden gnome. Can you send the breach notification tonight? It's 8:45 on a Thursday night. Their legal team won't see it until Monday morning. Perfect. That gives them the whole weekend to panic. Make sure it goes to their CEO, their general counsel, and Marcus Whitmore Sterling. That's Chad's real name? Unfortunately. Rich laughed, the kind of laugh that sounds like money changing hands. This is going to be chaos. Beautiful, billable chaos. Give me 20 minutes to draft it properly. I want to make sure every word is sharp enough to draw blood. I hung up and leaned against the railing, feeling the cold metal through my shirt. The city stretched out below me, millions of lights representing millions of people living their lives, completely unaware that somewhere in a fancy penthouse, a man who'd been dismissed as just here was about to prove that being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have. 23 minutes later, because Rich is thorough, I saw it happen. Marcus was mid-gesture, probably explaining how he was going to revolutionize something that didn't need revolutionizing, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it at first, because important people don't check their phones during important conversations. But it buzzed again, and then it started ringing. He pulled it out with this annoyed expression, like how dare his phone interrupt his performance, and glanced at the screen. I watched his face change in real time. It was like watching a time-lapse of a flower dying, except instead of petals falling off, it was his ego deflating. The champagne-pink flush of self-importance drained away, replaced by this sickly pale color that reminded me of cheap printer paper. He answered the call, and even from outside, I could see his body language shift. His shoulders hunched. His free hand came up to his forehead. He turned away from Sabrina and the little circle of admirers, walking quickly toward the corner of the room like he was trying to find somewhere to have a private breakdown. Sabrina looked confused, tried to follow him, but he waved her off without even looking at her. She stood there, wine glass in hand, suddenly alone in the middle of the party like someone had yanked her spotlight away mid-performance. And that's when Marcus looked up. His eyes scanned the room, probably looking for whoever had just dropped a legal bomb in his lap, and then they landed on the glass doors. On me. Standing there calm as anything, hands in my pockets, just watching. Our eyes met across the distance, through the glass, and I saw the moment it clicked. The moment he realized that the guy he'd barely acknowledged, the guy his star employee had dismissed as just here, was the same guy whose name was probably appearing approximately 50 times in the legal document currently making his lawyer have a panic attack. I didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't do anything dramatic. I just held his gaze for a long, beautiful moment, letting him understand exactly what he'd done wrong. You don't ignore people just because they're not wearing a name tag that says Executive Vice President of ruining your day. You don't let your new hire dismiss her husband like he's irrelevant. And you definitely don't try to acquire technology from a company without doing basic due diligence about who might have connections to whom. Then I did smile. Just a small one. The kind of smile that says, yeah, buddy, surprise. The guy you didn't think was worth acknowledging? He owns the ground your entire company's standing on. I turned and walked away from the balcony, leaving the party behind, leaving Sabrina to figure out why her boss suddenly looked like he'd seen a ghost, leaving Marcus to explain to his CEO why their biggest deal of the year just imploded because nobody bothered to ask the quiet guy in the corner what he did for a living. Revenge doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it just needs to be precisely timed and legally airtight. Rich Morrison isn't your typical lawyer. He doesn't wear those ridiculous power suits with the pinstripes that make you look like a mobster from a 1940s film noir. He doesn't have a fancy office in a skyscraper with his name embossed on the door in gold lettering. Instead, he works out of a converted brownstone in Brooklyn that used to be a bookstore, and he dresses like a professor who stopped caring about tenure. Rumpled button-downs, khakis with mysterious stains, and reading glasses that he loses approximately 12 times a day, even though they're usually on top of his head. But don't let the disheveled appearance fool you. Rich is the kind of lawyer who makes other lawyers nervous at dinner parties. He's the guy who reads contracts for fun, who gets genuinely excited about discovering loopholes, and who treats the legal system like it's an elaborate puzzle designed specifically for his entertainment. I met him 7 years ago when I needed help setting up Arcsyn Technologies, and within 10 minutes of our first meeting, I knew I'd found my people. He'd looked at my initial LLC documents and said, "This is garbage. Who wrote this? A chatbot having an existential crisis," and I'd immediately hired him. The thing about Rich is that he only smiles under very specific circumstances. When he's watching someone realize they've made a catastrophic legal error, when he finds a particularly elegant solution to a complicated problem, or when he's eating really good tacos. That's it. The man has the emotional range of a stoic philosopher except when it comes to other people's legal disasters, which he treats like Christmas morning. So when I showed up at his place around 9:30 that night, after leaving the party, after watching Marcus's face go through the 5 stages of grief in under 30 seconds, Rich opened the door, took one look at my expression, and actually rubbed his hands together with glee. "Oh, this is going to be good. Come in. I just made coffee that could probably strip paint, but it'll keep us awake." His office/living room was exactly what you'd expect from a brilliant lawyer who'd given up on impressing anyone. Books everywhere, not arranged by any system known to humanity. Papers stacked in piles that looked precarious, but which he swore had an organizational logic. A cat named Precedent who glared at everyone like they were in contempt of court. And a massive desk that had probably witnessed more legal victories than most courtrooms. I sat down in the chair across from his desk, the one with the spring that pokes you if you lean back too far, which I'm convinced he keeps that way on purpose to make clients uncomfortable during negotiations, and slid the folder across to him. Inside was everything. The original Arcsyn Technologies contracts, the licensing agreements with Hartman Logistics Solutions, Sabrina's employment records that I'd pulled from her laptop while she was in the shower last week. Because I'm thorough, not creepy, there's a difference. And the crown jewel, Clause 14b, highlighted in yellow like the treasure map it was. Rich put on his reading glasses, after finding them on his head, obviously, and started reading. I watched his face carefully, because Rich's expressions when reading legal documents are better than most people's reactions to surprise parties. His eyebrows started doing this little dance, moving up and down like they were communicating in Morse code. Then his mouth twitched. Then he started nodding. And finally, he looked up at me with the biggest grin I'd ever seen on his face, like someone had just told him Christmas was happening twice this year. "You magnificent bastard," he said, which coming from Rich was basically a Pulitzer Prize for life planning. "You actually wrote a spousal conflict clause into your licensing agreements 7 years ago. 6 years, 8 months, but who's counting? And your wife just started working for the company that's trying to expand their licensing rights with you? 3 months ago. She's been leading the integration project." Rich started laughing, the kind of deep, genuine laugh that you don't hear often from lawyers because most of them have had their souls slowly extracted through years of dealing with billable hours and difficult clients. "And she has no idea that Arcsyn Technologies is your company?" Apparently, I'm so unmemorable that she didn't recognize my own algorithm. To be fair, I did bury my name pretty deep in the corporate structure. On paper, I'm just the founder and CEO listed in the LLC documents. The tech is licensed under the company name, not mine personally. That's... Rich flipped through the pages again, his grin getting wider with each paragraph he read. "That's the most beautiful corporate setup I've seen in a decade. You're either a genius or a psychopath." "Compliment accepted," I said, taking a sip of his paint thinner coffee. He wasn't kidding. This stuff could probably dissolve a spoon if you left it in there long enough. Rich leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously, and steepled his fingers like a Bond villain about to explain his master plan. "Okay, let's walk through this. Hartman Logistics Solutions has been negotiating with Arcsyn for 6 months to expand their licensing agreement. They want to integrate your algorithm into their new platform. What's it called? Project Tusk. Because apparently, naming corporate projects after large mammals makes them sound more powerful. Right, Project Tusk. They've invested probably 7 figures into this rollout. They've promised their board, their shareholders, their clients that this is the future of their company. And your wife, who they hired 3 months ago and promoted to lead this integration, never disclosed that she's married to the guy who owns the technology they're licensing. In her defense, I don't think she knows. The only time she's ever asked about my work, I told her I do tech consulting, which is technically true, but also vague enough that she just nodded and went back to talking about her own career. Rich shook his head in what looked like admiration mixed with disbelief. And Clause 14b states that any direct conflict of interest, including spousal employment with a licensing partner, triggers an immediate breach of contract and termination rights, with a 30-day window for them to remedy the situation by either terminating the employee or abandoning the licensing expansion. And since they've already announced Project Tusk publicly and committed resources, option B is going to hurt a lot. This is, Rich trailed off, looking at the documents again like they were a work of art. This is the kind of thing they'll teach in law schools. This is how to protect your intellectual property from future complications you can't even imagine yet. Level thinking. Precedent. The cat jumped onto the desk and knocked over a pen holder, scattering pins everywhere, but neither of us paid attention because we were too busy crafting what was essentially a corporate nuclear bomb disguised as a compliance notification. Rich pulled up his laptop, which was covered in stickers from various legal conferences, and one that just said Subpoena Colada, with a picture of a tropical drink, and started typing. Okay, we're going to send this tonight. They won't see it until tomorrow morning, which gives them the entire weekend to freak out. We'll address it to their CEO, that's Gerald Hartman, still runs the company even though he's like 80 and definitely should have retired, their general counsel, and Marcus Whitmore Sterling, I supplied. The boss who asked if I was Sabrina's husband right before she demoted me to decorative plant status. Perfect. He's going to have a great Monday morning. Rich's fingers flew over the keyboard, and I could see the evil genius at work. The subject line alone was a masterpiece. Urgent. Breach notification re. ArcSyn Technologies licensing agreement. Immediate action required. We spent the next hour crafting the email. Rich insisted on making it perfect. Not aggressive, not emotional, just cold, factual, and legally devastating. Every sentence was designed to make their legal team's blood pressure spike. Every paragraph referenced specific contract clauses, dates, and obligations that had been violated. It was beautiful in the way that a perfectly executed checkmate is beautiful, elegant, inevitable, and absolutely brutal. Should we mention the remedy options? Rich asked, fingers poised over the keyboard. Oh, definitely. Give them hope that they can fix this. Let them think for a moment that maybe, just maybe, they can save their precious Project Tusk. And then they realize that both options are equally terrible and they're screwed either way. Rich grinned and added a paragraph outlining their choices. Terminate Sabrina's employment immediately or abandon the licensing expansion and eat whatever losses they'd already incurred. You know what the best part is? Even if they fire her immediately, the damage is done. They've already breached the contract. You can still terminate the agreement if you want. I know, but I'm not a monster. I'll let them keep the basic licensing they already had. I'm just nuking the expansion. At 10:47 p.m., Rich hit send. We both stared at the screen for a moment, watching the email disappear into the digital void, heading straight for the inboxes of people who were probably sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that their Friday morning was about to become a living nightmare. Somewhere, Rich said, leaning back in his chair with deep satisfaction, an intern is going to spill their coffee when they see this. Somewhere else, an executive is going to scream, find out who this guy is, while other executives scramble to figure out how they missed this. Meanwhile, I said, standing up and stretching, I'm going to go home, reheat some leftover lasagna, and watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Rich looked at me like I'd just said I was going to Disneyland. Your wife's career is about to implode, her company is about to lose millions, and you're going to watch sitcoms. The best revenge, I said, heading toward the door, is living well and not losing sleep over people who forgot you existed. Precedent me out in agreement, or maybe he just wanted food. Hard to tell with cats. I got home around 11:30, which gave me just enough time to preheat the oven, uncork a bottle of wine that cost more than it should have, and start prepping Sabrina's favorite risotto. You know the one, arborio rice, Parmesan cheese, white wine, and enough butter to make a cardiologist weep. It's the same dish I made for her when she got her first promotion 4 years ago, back when she still remembered to say thank you, back when my cooking efforts were met with genuine appreciation instead of distracted nods while she scrolled through work emails. The thing about making risotto is that it requires attention. You can't just dump everything in a pot and walk away like you're making spaghetti for a college dorm room dinner. You have to stand there, stirring constantly, adding the broth one ladle at a time, waiting for each addition to absorb before adding the next. It's meditative in a way, and tonight I needed the meditation because I was about to sit across from my wife and pretend I didn't just nuke her company's biggest project from orbit. I'd changed out of my party clothes into jeans and a worn t-shirt from a coding conference I'd attended back when I still thought networking events were useful instead of just elaborate wastes of time. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of the rice sizzling in the pan and the refrigerator humming its usual off-key tune. I turned on some jazz, the real stuff, not that corporate event garbage, because if I was going to play the role of oblivious househusband making dinner while Rome burned, I might as well have a good soundtrack. Around midnight, I heard her key in the door. She came in humming, some tune I didn't recognize, probably something that had been playing at the party. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor in that way that announces, "I had a great night, and I'm about to tell you all about it whether you care or not." She dropped her purse on the side table, the expensive leather one I'd bought her for her birthday last year, because she'd mentioned liking it once in passing, and I was still operating under the delusion that paying attention to details mattered. "Something smells amazing," she said, walking into the kitchen and loosening her hair from its corporate updo. "Are you making risotto?" "Your favorite," I said, not turning around from the stove because if I looked at her right now, I might start laughing, and that would ruin everything. "Figured we should celebrate your big night." She came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist, and for a second, just a second, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place. Back before the designer clothes and the corporate ladder climbing and the casual dismissals at parties. Back when we were just two people trying to figure out life together instead of two people who happened to share an address. "You're sweet," she said, already pulling away to pour herself a glass of the wine I'd opened. "My boss Marcus said the most amazing thing tonight. He pulled me aside right before we left and said I have real leadership material." "Can you believe that? Leadership material? Me? Wild?" I said, stirring the risotto with perhaps more force than necessary. "What brought that on?" She launched into this whole story about some presentation she'd given earlier in the week, about how Marcus had been impressed with her strategic thinking, about how she was being positioned for bigger things within the company. I made the appropriate listening noises, the ahas, and that's greats, while internally calculating how many hours she had left before her strategic thinking collided with my legal documentation. "And Project Tusk is going so well," she continued, settling onto one of the bar stools at our kitchen island. "We're ahead of schedule, the integration is smoother than anyone expected, and I'm leading the entire rollout. Do you know how huge this is? This could make my entire career." "Sounds important," I said, plating the risotto with the kind of care you'd expect from someone on a cooking show, not someone who was about to watch their wife's world implode. I added a garnish of fresh parsley because I'm petty enough to make sure even my revenge dinners look Instagram-worthy. I set the plate in front of her with a flourish, and she dug in immediately, not even waiting for me to sit down with my own plate. That was new too, the not waiting. There was a time when we'd always eat together, wait for each other, treat meals like they were moments worth sharing instead of just fuel stops between important things. "Oh my God, this is so good," she said between bites. "You should open a restaurant or something." "Yeah, because that's what every software developer dreams of, abandoning their career to flip risotto for tourists." She laughed, completely missing the edge in my voice. "You know what I mean. You're really talented at this." "Among other things," I said, sitting down across from her with my own plate. She started talking about the algorithm, my algorithm, though she didn't know that yet, describing it like it was some magical piece of technology that had just appeared out of nowhere, gift-wrapped by the universe specifically for Hartman Logistics Solutions. "It's brilliant, honestly. Whoever designed it really understood supply chain optimization at a level I've never seen before. The efficiency gains alone are going to save us millions annually." "Sounds impressive," I said, taking a sip of wine to hide my smile. "Where'd it come from?" "Some small tech company. Arxin Technologies?" I'd never heard of them before, but apparently they've been around for years. Very low profile, very under the radar. The algorithm itself is incredibly sophisticated, though. When I first saw the code documentation, I thought. She paused, her fork halfway to her mouth, a weird expression crossing her face. You thought what? It's going to sound crazy, but the architecture looked oddly familiar. Like I'd seen that approach before. The way the functions nested, the variable naming conventions, even some of the comments in the documentation. It reminded me of. She shook her head, laughing at herself. Never mind, it's stupid. No, tell me. I leaned forward, genuinely curious to see if she'd actually make the connection. It reminded me of the stuff you used to work on. Back when we first met, when you were always hunched over your laptop at 3 in the morning, building that routing thing. Remember? Vaguely, I lied. Yeah, you were obsessed with it for like 2 years. You'd try to explain the logic to me, and I'd pretend to understand while secretly having no idea what you were talking about. She laughed again, nostalgic for a version of herself that at least pretended to care about my work. Anyway, this algorithm has the same kind of elegant simplicity. It's rare to see code that's sophisticated without all the unnecessary bells and whistles. Maybe whoever built it learned from the same principles I did. I said, which was technically true since I was the one who built it, and I definitely learned from my own principles. She nodded, accepting this explanation, and went back to her risotto. Marcus wants me to present the rollout timeline to the board next month. The board? Can you imagine? A year ago, I was middle management, and now I'm presenting to the board of directors. Quite the meteoric rise, I said. Earlier that afternoon, I'd sent a cease and desist to their primary vendor, the company that was manufacturing the hardware interfaces for Project Tusk. Not because I'm cruel, but because I'm thorough. If I was going to crater this project, I was going to make sure there were no lifeboats. You know what the best part is? Sabrina was on her second glass of wine now, getting that loose, chatty energy she gets when she's had a good day and good alcohol. The algorithm is so good that it's basically running itself. We barely have to modify it. It's like someone built it specifically for our needs, down to the last detail. Yeah, I said, finishing my own wine and standing up to clear the plates. It's got my fingerprints all over it. She laughed, thinking I was making a joke about how all good code looks the same or something equally innocuous. Right, like you secretly moonlight as a logistics software developer. Something like that, I said, loading the dishwasher with the careful precision of someone who was definitely not imagining how this conversation would replay in her head in about 12 hours. She helped me clean up, or rather, she stood nearby drinking wine while I cleaned up, which had become her version of helping, and kept talking about Marcus, about the project, about her trajectory within the company. Every sentence was about upward movement, about progress, about becoming someone important. Not once did she ask about my day, about what I'd been working on, about anything related to my life that didn't directly serve as a supporting role in her narrative. I'm thinking about redecorating my office, she said as we moved to the living room. Something that says executive without being too aggressive. Maybe one of those modern credenzas? And definitely some art. Real art, not the prints we have here. Sure, I said, settling onto the couch and pulling up Netflix. Whatever makes you happy. You're the best, she said, kissing the top of my head like I was a golden retriever who'd just performed a simple trick correctly. I'm going to take a bath. That party was exhausting. She disappeared down the hallway, and I heard the bathroom door close, then the water start running. I sat there in the quiet living room, my phone next to me with Rich's last text still on the screen. Email sent. Timer started. Enjoy the show. I pulled up Brooklyn Nine-Nine and started an episode I'd seen a dozen times. The one where Jake runs an elaborate prank on Holt that takes months to execute. The irony wasn't lost on me. On screen, Andy Samberg was grinning like a maniac, proud of his carefully orchestrated chaos. I understood completely. Tomorrow was Friday. By Monday morning, Sabrina's world would look very different. Her leadership material would be in question. Her meteoric rise would hit some unexpected turbulence. And that algorithm she found oddly familiar? She was about to find out exactly why. Friday morning started exactly the way I'd hoped it would, with Sabrina getting a text message at 7:15 that made her coffee mug pause halfway to her mouth, like someone had hit the pause button on her entire nervous system. I was sitting at the kitchen table pretending to read the news on my tablet, but really I was watching her face cycle through confusion, concern, and then that special kind of dread that only comes from corporate summons that arrive before business hours even officially start. I have to go in early, she said, setting down her mug with a hand that wasn't quite steady. They want me there by 8:30 for a quick compliance check. Compliance check? I said, looking up with what I hoped was an appropriately confused expression. That sounds ominous. Like when the dentist says, you might feel a little pressure right before they start excavating your molars. It's probably nothing. Just routine stuff. She was already moving toward the bedroom. That corporate autopilot kicking in that makes people straighten their posture and check their appearance even when they're terrified. They probably just need me to sign some updated paperwork or review project documentation. On a Friday morning? Before 8:30? I took a sip of my own coffee, which was significantly better than Rich's paint thinner brew, and watched her through the kitchen doorway as she frantically changed from her casual Friday outfit into full corporate armor. The power suit, the serious heels, the whole. I'm ready to defend my position uniform. It's fine. I'm sure it's fine. She was talking to herself more than to me, doing that thing people do when they're trying to convince themselves that the universe isn't about to drop a piano on their head. Maybe they just want to discuss the next phase of Project Tusk. Maybe Marcus recommended me for that director position. Maybe you should bring a lawyer, I said helpfully. She stopped in the doorway, one earring in, mascara wand frozen in her hand. Why would I need a lawyer for a compliance check? No reason. Just seems like the kind of thing lawyers enjoy. You know how they get all excited about paperwork and regulations. It's like catnip for people who went to law school. She stared at me for a second, trying to figure out if I was being serious or just weird, then shook her head and went back to her makeup. You're being strange this morning. Am I? Huh. Must be the coffee. I went back to my tablet, scrolling through absolutely nothing while listening to her rush around the apartment, gathering her laptop, her portfolio, her phone charger, all the accessories of modern corporate life. She was out the door by 7:45, barely remembering to kiss me goodbye, already mentally preparing for whatever awaited her. I waited exactly 3 minutes after she left, then texted Rich. She's on her way. His response was immediate. I'll have popcorn ready for the fallout. This is better than Netflix. The thing about working from home is that you have a lot of flexibility in your schedule. So instead of doing any actual work, I spent the morning cleaning the apartment. Not because it needed cleaning, but because I needed something to do with my hands while I waited for the bomb to detonate. I vacuumed, did the dishes, even organized the spice cabinet, which is something I'd been putting off for approximately 6 months. By 9:30, our apartment looked like it was ready for a magazine photo shoot, and I was ready for my wife to come home and realize her entire career trajectory had just hit a brick wall at highway speed. The call came at 2:15. Sabrina's name lit up my phone screen, and I let it ring 3 times before answering because I'm committed to the performance. Hey, how'd the compliance check go? Silence. Not the comfortable kind, but the kind where you can hear someone's entire worldview crumbling in real time. Then, in a voice so small it barely qualified as a whisper, can you come pick me up? What happened to your car? I took an Uber this morning. I don't. She paused, and I could hear street noise in the background, the sounds of the city moving around her while she stood still. I don't trust myself to drive right now. 20 minutes later, I pulled up in front of the Hartman Logistics Solutions headquarters, a gleaming glass monstrosity in Midtown that probably won architectural awards for being aggressively modern and completely soulless. Sabrina was sitting on a bench outside, still in her power suit, but all the power had leaked out of it. Her hair, which had been perfectly styled this morning, looked like she'd been running her hands through it for hours. Her makeup was smudged in a way that suggested crying in a bathroom stall, that universal corporate experience of having a breakdown in the one place you think no one can see you. She got in the car without saying anything, just buckled her seatbelt and stared straight ahead like she was watching a movie only she could see, and it wasn't a good movie. I drove in silence for a few blocks, waiting, because I knew the story was coming. It always comes. People can't hold trauma like that inside. It needs an exit, and I was the nearest available audience. They knew, she finally said, her voice flat and hollow. They knew everything. Knew what? I asked, playing the role of confused, supportive husband, which was honestly kind of fun in a deeply terrible way. About you. About Arkson. About. She turned to look at me. Really look at me. Maybe for the first time in months. Why didn't you tell me you own the company we were licensing from? You never asked what I did for a living. Not in any specific way. I told you I had a tech company. You nodded and went back to talking about your quarterly projections. She looked like I'd slapped her, which was fair because the truth often feels exactly like that. The CEO was there. Gerald Hartman himself. Do you know how rarely he comes to compliance meetings? Never. He never comes to compliance meetings. But there he was, looking like someone had stolen his yacht, which apparently someone kind of did because that deal was worth millions and now it's gone. What deal? Project Tusk. The expansion. Everything I've been working on for 3 months. She was crying now, not the pretty kind of crying from movies, but the ugly, snotty kind that comes from genuine devastation. Their lawyer read your notice out loud. Every single clause, every single breach, every single way we'd violated the contract. And Marcus, she stopped, laughed bitterly. Marcus couldn't even look at me. Just sat there staring at his phone like if he ignored me hard enough, I'd disappear. Marcus Whitmore Sterling? The guy with the gel hair and the opinions about disruption. Don't. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. Don't make jokes right now. I'm not joking. I'm clarifying who we're talking about. We stopped at a red light, and in the silence between us, I could hear her breathing, fast and shallow, the kind of breathing that happens when your body can't decide if it wants to scream or shut down completely. Gerald called me Jessica at first. Jessica. He didn't even remember my name. And then he corrected himself and said, Sabrina, you didn't disclose that your husband owns the intellectual property we just acquired licensing rights for. And I just sat there like an idiot saying I didn't know. I didn't know it was his. I had no idea. Which is true. Which makes me look either incompetent or dishonest. And I'm not sure which is worse. She turned away from me, pressing her forehead against the passenger window like she was trying to cool down a fever. Do you know what they asked me? They asked if we'd colluded. If this was some kind of scheme to infiltrate their company and sabotage the deal from the inside. I almost laughed, but managed to turn it into a cough. That would require significantly more planning and considerably more evil intent than either of us possess. I told them we barely even talk about work, that you never asked about my projects and I never asked about yours, that we're basically roommates who occasionally have dinner together. She said it like it was a defense, but it came out sounding like an accusation against both of us. And you know what Gerald said? He said that's exactly the problem. That married couples should know what the other one does for a living. That basic due diligence includes not being oblivious to your own spouse's business interests. The light turned green, and I drove toward our apartment, taking the long route, because I had a feeling this story wasn't finished yet. What else did they say? They gave me 2 options. Her voice was so quiet I almost couldn't hear it over the sound of traffic. Resign immediately or be terminated for failure to disclose a conflict of interest. They said either way, my role in Project Tusk is over. The whole initiative is being suspended pending legal review. 3 months of work, gone. Partnerships with vendors, gone. The presentation I was supposed to give to the board next month, canceled. I'm sorry, I said, and part of me actually meant it. Not sorry enough to undo what I'd done, but sorry that it had to happen this way. Sorry that she'd never bothered to know me well enough to avoid this particular disaster. Are you though? She turned to look at me, and there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not anger exactly, but recognition. Like she was finally seeing me as an actual person instead of as background furniture in her life story. You knew this would happen. That clause didn't just magically appear in the contract yesterday. No. It's been there for about 6 years. 6 years. She repeated it like she was testing the weight of the timeline. You wrote a clause 6 years ago protecting yourself from exactly this situation. I wrote a clause protecting my intellectual property from conflicts of interest. I didn't know you'd be the conflict of interest. We pulled into our apartment building's garage, and I parked in our assigned spot, the one with my name on it, not hers, because I'd been the one to put down the deposit on this place back when she was still trying to figure out if corporate life was really what she wanted. She sat there for a long moment, not moving, just staring at the concrete wall in front of us. What did you do? She finally asked, her voice stripped of all its usual confidence and corporate polish. Nothing, I said, turning off the engine and meeting her eyes in the dim garage lighting. I just reminded them who's really here. We sat in the car for another 10 minutes after I turned off the engine, neither of us moving. Both of us processing the fact that our marriage had just been downgraded from barely functional to legally complicated disaster. Finally, Sabrina unbuckled her seatbelt with the kind of defeated click that sounds like giving up, and we headed upstairs in silence that was so thick you could practically package it and sell it as insulation. I unlocked the apartment door and stood aside to let her in first, which in retrospect might have been my villain origin moment, because what she saw immediately was the manila folder sitting dead center on our dining table. Not off to the side where junk mail goes to die. Not buried under takeout menus and random batteries we keep meaning to organize. Right in the middle, impossible to miss, positioned with the kind of deliberate placement that screams, "We need to talk," in every language known to humanity. "What's that?" she asked, but her voice had this quality to it like she already knew the answer wouldn't be good, like her body was preemptively bracing for another punch. "That," I said, hanging up my jacket with exaggerated casualness, "is something we should probably discuss. You want coffee? Water? Something stronger? Because I'm thinking we're going to need beverages for this conversation." She walked over to the table like she was approaching a bomb, which honestly wasn't that far off. Her hand hovered over the folder for a second before she pulled it toward her and flipped it open. I watched from the kitchen as her eyes scanned the first page, then the second, then she started flipping faster, her breathing getting quicker with each document she revealed. Inside that folder was everything. And when I say everything, I mean every single financial move I'd made over the past 8 months, all documented with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that would make an accountant weep with joy. The house. The beautiful 3-bedroom brownstone we'd bought together 5 years ago when we still used words like we and our future had been transferred into an irrevocable trust in my name 6 months ago. The car, the pretty little BMW that Sabrina loved because it made her feel successful and important, was now registered solely to me as of 4 months ago. The joint savings account that she'd barely glanced at in years had been systematically emptied and redistributed into accounts she had no access to. Every piece of paper in that folder represented a choice I'd made, a precaution I'd taken, a future I'd been planning while she'd been busy climbing corporate ladders and forgetting I existed. I'd spent months with Rich, going through every asset, every account, every possible financial entanglement, making sure that when the time came, and I'd known the time would come eventually, I wouldn't be the one left holding the empty bag. "You moved the house," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her finger tracing the property transfer document like maybe if she touched it enough, the words would rearrange themselves into something less devastating. "You transferred the house into a trust." "Yep. Back in February, actually. You were on that business trip to Chicago. Remember? The one where you were gone for a week and came back talking about how inspiring Marcus was." She didn't respond to that, just kept flipping through pages, her face getting paler with each revelation. The car, the savings account, the investment portfolio. She looked up at me, and I've never seen someone's eyes contain that much betrayal and realization simultaneously. "You moved everything." "Not everything," I corrected, pouring myself a glass of water because someone had to maintain composure in this situation. "Your 401k is still yours. Your personal checking account is untouched. I'm not a complete monster. I just made sure that the assets I actually paid for, the things I actually built and contributed to, stayed with me." "You can't do this." She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound like a scream. "You can't just unilaterally decide to." "I can actually. And I did. It's all legal." Rich went through everything with a fine-tooth comb. Every document is signed, notarized, filed with the appropriate authorities. "You want to fight it? Go ahead. Get yourself a lawyer. But I should warn you that fighting this will cost more in legal fees than you'd probably win back. And that's assuming you could win back anything at all, which Rich assures me you can't." She was breathing hard now, that panicky kind of breathing where your chest heaves and your hands shake and you're not sure if you're going to cry or scream or just collapse. "When did you do all this? How did you do all this without me knowing? You really want the answer to that?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching her like a scientist observing an experiment. "Because the answer is going to make you feel worse, not better. Tell me. You didn't notice because you stopped paying attention. The house transfer? I told you I was updating our estate planning documents and you signed without reading them because you were on a conference call about supply chain optimization. The car registration? I said I was taking care of the renewal and you said, 'Thanks, babe,' without looking up from your laptop. The bank accounts? You haven't checked our joint account statements in over a year. I know because the bank sends alerts and you've never once mentioned them. Each sentence landed like a slap, and I could see her rewinding through months of interactions, seeing them differently now, understanding that all those moments she'd dismissed as boring household administration had actually been me methodically dismantling the financial structure of our marriage. She sat back down heavily, the folder still open in front of her like evidence at a crime scene. This is insane. This is vindictive. This is strategic. I finished. The word you're looking for is strategic. You know, that thing you're always talking about at work? How important it is to think 3 steps ahead, to anticipate obstacles and plan accordingly. I learned that from watching you, actually. You're an excellent teacher when it comes to covering your own ass. I never did anything to deserve this. She was crying now, big tears rolling down her face and dropping onto the documents, slightly smudging the ink on a bank transfer form. I worked hard. I built my career. I didn't cheat on you, I didn't. You erased me, I said, and my voice came out harder than I'd intended. Not all at once, not in some dramatic moment, but slowly, over years, you turned me from your husband into your supporting cast member. And last night, at that party, when your boss asked if I was your husband and you said I was just here, that was just you finally saying out loud what you'd been thinking for the past 2 years. She looked up at me with red, puffy eyes, mascara streaking down her cheeks like war paint after a battle that had already been lost. So what? This is punishment. This is revenge because I didn't introduce you properly at a work party. No, this is me making sure that when this marriage finally collapses, and we both know it's collapsing, we've just been too polite or too cowardly to say it out loud. I'm not the one left with nothing. You wanted to be a boss lady? You wanted to post about your boss energy and your rise to leadership? Well, congratulations. You just got outbossed by the guy you called just here. The silence that followed was the kind that feels physical, like you could reach out and touch it. Sabrina sat there staring at the documents, occasionally picking one up and reading it more carefully, probably looking for loopholes or mistakes or anything that would give her leverage. But there was nothing. Rich had been thorough. Every I was dotted, every T was crossed, every possible legal challenge had been anticipated and neutralized. The worst part, she finally said, her voice hollow and defeated, is that you're right. I did stop seeing you. I don't even know when it happened. It was just gradual. Like you faded into the background while I was busy focusing on my career and my goals and my future. And I didn't realize until right now that I'd stopped thinking about our future and started thinking about my future. Yeah, well, realizations are great and all, but they don't really help when they come after you've already blown everything up. She closed the folder carefully, like maybe if she was gentle enough with it, the contents would somehow hurt less. What happens now? Now? Now we stop pretending. We've been living like roommates for the better part of a year anyway. At least now we can stop lying about it. Are you filing for divorce? I paused, considering the question. Honestly, I hadn't gotten that far in my planning. The revenge part had been meticulously plotted, but the aftermath was still kind of fuzzy. I don't know yet. Are you? I don't know either. She stood up, picking up the folder and holding it against her chest like a shield. I need some air. I need to think. I don't even know what I need. Take the folder with you. Consider it a gift. Most people have to hire a forensic accountant to figure out where their assets went. I'm giving you the whole paper trail for free. She walked toward the bedroom, then stopped in the doorway and turned back to face me. You know what's funny? This morning, I was thinking about asking you to come to the board presentation next month. I was going to introduce you to everyone, show you off, make you part of my success. And now there's no presentation, no success to share, and apparently no us to speak of. Timing's a bitch, I said. So are you, apparently, she replied, and disappeared into the bedroom. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time after she left, staring at the empty dining table where the folder had been, wondering if I was supposed to feel guilty or triumphant or something in between. Mostly I just felt tired. Revenge is exhausting when you have to watch someone realize exactly how badly they've underestimated you. It's satisfying, sure, but it's also kind of sad. My phone buzzed with a text from Rich. How'd she take it? I typed back. About as well as anyone takes finding out their entire financial life got reorganized without their knowledge. That's what we call in the legal profession a teaching moment, he replied. Yeah, a teaching moment that cost my wife her job, her project, and her illusions about our marriage. But hey, at least the risotto had been good. Saturday morning, I woke up to discover that my wife had become a trending topic on LinkedIn, which is basically the corporate equivalent of going viral for all the wrong reasons. I know this because my phone started buzzing at 6:43 in the morning with screenshots from Derek, my old coding buddy, who apparently has nothing better to do on weekends than monitor professional networking sites for drama. Dude. His text read, accompanied by 3 screenshots. Your wife is famous. Not good famous. More like cautionary tale in a business ethics seminar famous. I sat up in bed, alone, because Sabrina had spent the night in the guest room after our little manila folder revelation and scrolled through the images. Someone at Hartman Logistics Solutions had clearly violated several confidentiality agreements because the story was out there in all its glory. Not the details, exactly, but enough breadcrumbs that the LinkedIn crowd had put together a narrative that was about 70% accurate and 30% speculation that somehow made the truth even worse. The post that started it all came from an account called Corporate Tea Spiller, because apparently we've reached a point in civilization where anonymous social media accounts dedicated to workplace gossip are just accepted parts of professional culture. The post read, Major logistics company just suspended their biggest integration project because an employee forgot to mention her husband owns the tech they licensed. Due diligence? Never heard of her. Hashtag corporate compliance, hashtag awkward, hashtag supply chain drama. Within 12 hours, it had 4,000 reactions, 800 comments, and had been shared by what looked like half of corporate America. The comments section was a beautiful disaster of people who'd clearly never made a mistake in their lives offering their expert opinions on professional ethics, conflict of interest policies, and whether this constituted fraud. Spoiler alert. According to Random Guy 47 with the profile picture of a golden retriever, it definitely constituted fraud and possibly treason. My personal favorite comment came from someone named Jennifer who listed her title as Thought Leader Innovator Disruptor and had written, This is exactly why companies need robust compliance frameworks and why employees need to practice radical transparency. As a leader in the space, I always tell my team, when in doubt, disclose. Hashtag leadership, hashtag transparency, hashtag corporate governance. Yeah, Jennifer, I'm sure your team loves your radical transparency, especially when you're being radically transparent about how you credit their ideas as your own in meetings. But the real damage wasn't happening on LinkedIn, where at least everything was anonymous and vague. The real carnage was happening in the private channels, the group chats, the Slack workspaces where Sabrina's coworkers were actively cutting her out of their digital lives like she was a character being edited out of a photo. I know this because Sabrina's laptop was still sitting on the dining room table from yesterday, and when I walked past it to get coffee, the screen lit up with notification after notification, each one a tiny little knife. Emily Williams removed you from Project Tusk core team. Marcus Whitmore Sterling removed you from Leadership Track 2025. Brian Shin removed you from Friday Happy Hour crew. That last one particularly brutal because it wasn't even work-related. They were excommunicating her from social events. She'd gone from rising star to radioactive liability in less than 24 hours, and her former friends and colleagues were scrambling to make sure none of that radiation touched them. I made coffee, the good stuff, not the instant garbage we keep around for emergencies, and settled onto the couch with my laptop to properly observe the unfolding disaster. It felt wrong to enjoy it, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't experiencing a certain satisfaction watching the same corporate machine that had elevated her to leadership material, now systematically dismantling her reputation. Around 9, I heard the guest room door open. Sabrina emerged looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight. Hair disheveled, eyes puffy, still wearing yesterday's clothes because apparently moving to the bedroom to get pajamas would have required more energy than she possessed. She didn't look at me, just made a beeline for the coffee pot, poured herself a cup, and stood at the kitchen counter staring at nothing. Your laptop's been blowing up, I said, gesturing toward the dining table. Looks like the group chat purge is in full effect. She walked over, looked at the screen, and I watched something die in her eyes. Not dramatically, not with any visible emotion, just a quiet extinguishing of whatever hope she'd been holding on to that maybe this could be contained, maybe it wouldn't be that bad. Maybe her colleagues would understand. They're removing me from everything, she said flatly. Even the non-work stuff. Yeah, that's how it goes. Corporate loyalty lasts exactly as long as you're useful and not a liability. The second you become a risk to other people's careers, you're gone. It's like those nature documentaries where the herd abandons the sick gazelle. That's a lovely image, thank you. I'm not wrong, though. She couldn't argue with that because we both knew I wasn't. Instead, she sat down at the table and started scrolling through her various group chats, watching years of professional relationships evaporate in real time. The Women in Leadership group, where she'd been a regular contributor, radio silence, and her last 3 messages were now showing as read by 12 people with 0 responses. The Hartman Rising Stars channel, where people posted their wins and celebrated promotions. Someone had actually posted a generic message about the importance of ethics and transparency in leadership roles that was so obviously about Sabrina, it might as well have included her photo. Her phone rang around 10:30, and the name on the screen made her physically recoil. Mom. She stared at it for 3 rings before answering, and I couldn't help but turn down the TV volume to better hear this conversation because Sabrina's mother, Patricia, was legendary in ways that made my revenge plot look amateur. Hi, Mom, Sabrina said in a voice that was trying very hard to sound normal and failing spectacularly. I couldn't hear Patricia's exact words, but I could hear her tone. That particular brand of maternal disappointment that somehow manages to be both concerned and accusatory at the same time. It's an art form, really. Sabrina's face went through several color changes as she listened, eventually settling on a pale gray that reminded me of dirty dishwater. Mom, I didn't know, she tried to interject, but Patricia was clearly on a roll. More listening, more color changes. Then Sabrina's eyes flicked to me, and I gave her a little wave because I'm helpful like that. Yes, he's here, she said, and I could hear the slight emphasis on he like I was some cryptid she'd forgotten lived in her house. Patricia's voice got louder, clear enough that I could make out actual words now. Paid for your entire MBA, didn't he? While you were in school, who was working? Who was supporting you? Who made sure you could focus on your studies instead of worrying about rent? Mom, that's not me, Sabrina Marie. I raised you better than this. You don't forget about the people who helped you get where you are. You don't. Patricia paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had that quality that mothers develop that can make grown adults feel like they're 6 years old again and being scolded for stealing cookies. Did you even know what your husband did for a living? Sabrina looked at me, really looked at me, with an expression that was part pleading and part accusation, like somehow this was my fault for not forcing her to pay attention. I knew he had a tech company. I just didn't know the details. You didn't ask. Patricia didn't phrase it as a question. You were so busy climbing your ladder that you didn't bother to notice your husband had built his own, and his went higher than yours ever will. Ouch. Even I felt that one, and it wasn't directed at me. Mom, I have to go, Sabrina said, her voice cracking. No, you don't. You're going to sit there and listen because someone needs to tell you the truth, and apparently, no one else in your life is willing to do it. You treated your marriage like a convenience store, only going there when you needed something, never thinking about who was keeping the lights on. That's not fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? The man put his career on hold to support yours. He cooked your meals, managed your house, celebrated your victories, and you repaid him by introducing him as just here at a party. Like he was a piece of furniture. Like he didn't matter. And now you're surprised that he protected himself from you. Silence from Sabrina. Just quiet crying. The kind where you're trying to hold it together and failing. I didn't raise you to be this person, Patricia continued, and now her voice had softened slightly, disappointment giving way to something closer to sadness. I raised you to be grateful, to be aware, to recognize when someone is sacrificing for you. And somewhere along the way, you forgot that. You got so caught up in being successful that you forgot to be decent. I know, Sabrina whispered. I know, Mom. Knowing isn't enough. Knowing doesn't fix anything. You need to figure out who you want to be. The person who uses people and then acts shocked when they're done being used, or the person who actually sees the people around her. I don't know how to fix this. Maybe you can't. Maybe some things, once broken, stay broken. But you better figure out who you are without that job, without that title, without all the things you've been using to define yourself. Because right now, you've got nothing except a husband you don't deserve and a reputation that's toast. Click. Patricia hung up. No goodbye. No love you. Just the sound of maternal disappointment delivered with surgical precision, and then silence. Sabrina sat there holding her phone, staring at the screen like it might offer her some kind of answer or comfort or explanation. Then she set it down very carefully on the table, stood up, walked back to the guest room, and closed the door. I sat on the couch, TV still muted, coffee getting cold, thinking about what Patricia had said. The woman had a point. Several points, actually. All of them sharp and accurate and delivered with the kind of honesty that only mothers can really get away with. My phone buzzed with another text from Derek. LinkedIn update. Someone started a poll about whether employees should have to disclose spousal business connections. Your wife's situation is literally becoming a case study. This is wild. I typed back. Should I feel bad about this? Probably, he responded. But are you going to? I thought about it for a second, then replied. Ask me again in a week. Because honestly, I didn't know yet. Revenge feels great in the moment, but watching someone's entire world collapse in real time is complicated. Satisfying, sure. Justified, maybe. But also kind of exhausting. I turned the TV back on and found a basketball game. Something mindless and competitive where the stakes were clear and the rules made sense, unlike my marriage or my conscience. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train crashing through a library, and I knew Sabrina's final humiliation was scheduled for 9:30 because she'd received the email Sunday night. The kind of corporate communication that's written in careful, neutral language, but might as well say bring a box for your stuff because you're toast. The subject line read, required HR discussion, attendance mandatory, which in corporate speak translates to, we're about to fire you, but we need witnesses and documentation. She got dressed in what I can only describe as funeral attire, black pants, black blouse, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a way that said, I've given up, but I'm still showing up professionally. I offered to make her breakfast, which was either compassionate or sadistic depending on your perspective, but she just shook her head and left with a travel mug of coffee that she'd probably forget to drink. I spent the morning working from home, actually working this time, responding to client emails, reviewing some code updates, but my phone was sitting face up on my desk because I was waiting for the inevitable call or text that would signal the end of Sabrina's corporate existence as she knew it. It came at 11:47, not from her, but from Derek, who'd apparently developed a sixth sense for workplace disasters. Corporate T-Spiller just posted an update. His text read, something about employee placed on administrative leave pending investigation. That your wife? Probably, I typed back. HR was meeting with her this morning. Dude, this is brutal. They're making an example out of her. He wasn't wrong. In the grand scheme of corporate screw-ups, what Sabrina had done wasn't even that bad. She'd failed to disclose a conflict of interest, sure, but it wasn't fraud, wasn't embezzlement, wasn't insider trading, or any of the actually criminal things people do in business. But companies love a good sacrifice, especially when they need to show their board and shareholders that they take compliance seriously. And Sabrina, unfortunately, was the perfect offering, mid-level enough to matter, but not senior enough to be protected. She came home at 2:15 carrying a cardboard box that contained the detritus of her professional life. A coffee mug with some inspirational quote about girl bosses. A fake succulent that had somehow survived 3 years of office fluorescent lighting. A framed photo of us from our honeymoon that I was surprised she still kept on her desk. And her ego, which was significantly more damaged than when it had left the apartment that morning. I was in the kitchen when she walked in, pretending to be invested in making lunch, but really just waiting to see how bad it was. She set the box down on the dining table, the same table where the manila folder had been, because apparently this table had become ground zero for our relationship's complete implosion, and stood there staring at it like it was evidence of a crime she didn't remember committing. They had my Slack messages, she said finally, her voice completely devoid of emotion. Printed out. In a binder. HR loves binders. Makes them feel official. They asked if I'd knowingly concealed my husband's connection to Arxin Technologies. I said no, I genuinely didn't know. And then, she stopped, laughed bitterly, the kind of laugh that sounds like breaking glass. Then they showed me my own messages. From the internal project channel. From 3 weeks ago. I didn't say anything, just waited, because this was clearly going somewhere and interrupting would ruin her momentum. Someone had asked where the algorithm came from, who built it, what the backstory was. And I wrote. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to a screenshot she'd apparently taken, and read it out loud. My husband's just a hobbyist. He doesn't even know we're using it. That's what I wrote. In writing. In a channel with 43 people in it. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight and texture. I could see her brain processing the full implications, not just that she'd been dismissive of me, which we'd already established, but that she'd been dismissive in a permanent, documented, searchable format that HR could print out and wave around like a flag of her complete lack of awareness. They asked how I could claim I didn't know my husband owned the company when I'd literally mentioned him in connection to similar technology. They used the word literally. HR used internet slang, which is how you know you're really screwed. What did you say? What could I say? I stammered something about not making the connection, about not realizing, about the name being different, ArcSyn versus my husband's name. They just stared at me like I was an idiot. Which, to be fair, I was. Whatever. Administrative leave? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Pending investigation, which is corporate code for, we're firing you, but we need to make sure all the paperwork is perfect so you can't sue us. They walked me to my desk, watched me pack, and then escorted me out like I'd stolen office supplies. She picked up the coffee mug from the box, looked at it, and set it down again. 3 years. 3 years of late nights, of proving myself, of working twice as hard as everyone else to get half the recognition. And it's over because I didn't know what my own husband did for a living. To be fair, you didn't ask. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and there was something in her expression I couldn't quite read. Resignation, maybe, or acceptance, or just exhaustion. No, she said quietly. I didn't plan to be there when she left the building for the last time. Honest to God, it was pure coincidence. I'd been meeting with a potential new client at a coffee shop 2 blocks from Hartman Logistics Solutions, and I was walking back to my car when I saw the glass doors of that ridiculous corporate monument reflecting the afternoon sun like it was trying to blind everyone into submission. So I stopped, grabbed a coffee from a street vendor who looked like he'd seen every kind of human drama unfold on this corner and had stopped being impressed years ago. And I waited, leaning against a lamppost like some noir detective, except instead of solving crimes, I was just watching karma do its thing in real time. Sabrina emerged at 3:47, still carrying that pathetic cardboard box, still wearing her funeral outfit, walking with the kind of defeated posture that makes people look smaller than they actually are. She didn't see me at first, too busy staring at her phone, probably reading termination emails or LinkedIn messages from former colleagues explaining why they had to unfollow her for professional reasons. But then Marcus Whitmore Sterling came out right behind her, phone pressed to his ear, talking loudly about damage control and investor confidence, performing competence for whoever was unfortunate enough to be on the other end of that call. He was mid-sentence, something about mitigating reputational risk, when he looked up and saw me standing there. The man froze, just completely stopped moving like someone had hit his pause button. His mouth hung open mid-word, his gel hair perfection catching the sunlight in a way that would have been impressive if it wasn't so ridiculous. I didn't do anything dramatic, didn't flip him off or yell across the street or make any kind of scene that people would remember. I just looked at him, calm, casual, coffee in hand, and gave him the smallest nod, polite, almost friendly, the kind of acknowledgement you'd give a stranger who held the door open for you. That's when I saw it click in his brain. The full, terrible realization that the guy he'd dismissed, the guy his star employee had called just here, the guy they'd both treated like irrelevant background furniture, was the ghost haunting every failed contract, every suspended project, every executive panic attack that company would have for the next 6 months. I took a sip of my coffee, smiled, just a little one, and walked away. They'll tell stories about that moment. The quiet guy who destroyed a $1 million deal with one contract clause and a calm expression. The husband who reminded an entire company that underestimating someone doesn't make them powerless. Because revenge doesn't need fireworks or dramatic speeches. Sometimes it just needs timing, a really good lawyer, and the patience to watch people realize exactly who they should have been paying attention to all along.